Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Years ago, I began recording the bedtime stories I told my children every night. Now, we would like to share those stories with you. I hope you enjoy my Stories for Wonderful Children.
Time there was a little girl. Her name was Linda. Linda. In most respects, Linda was an ordinary little girl. She had ordinary blonde hair and wore ordinary dresses to an ordinary school. She had an ordinary mommy and daddy and lived in an ordinary house with an ordinary brother and an ordinary sister. There was really only one thing that made Linda rather extraordinary. And that was that at her birth, a fairy had visited her mommy and daddy and had given them a gift. The gift was for Linda's 7th birthday, and when she turned 7, she was to open it. Wow. Her mommy and daddy did as the fairy had requested. They put her gift in the top of a closet, and every birthday they let Linda take it out and look at it, but not unwrap it. She didn't really think much of it when she turned 1 or 2 or 3, but when she turned 4, she began to wonder what was inside it. When she turned 5, she started to become really curious, and she shook it a little bit to see if it made a sound, but it didn't. When as she turned 6, she asked her mommy and daddy if she couldn't open it this year, because it was really only 1 year away, and they said that no, fairies are magical beings. One should not ignore their requests lightly. So Linda satisfied herself with shaking the package and sniffing the package and weighing the package and wondering what could be inside it. And so it was not very heavy at all. And so when her 7th birthday arrived, the very first present that she wanted to open, when it came time for present opening time, was the present from the fairy. She ripped the package open, and she didn't know quite what to expect. But she certainly did not expect, and had never imagined, what she found inside. What she found inside was a sponge. The sponge was green, and for the most part it looked like any other sponge, like the sponge used to wash dishes or to clean things. Linda was at first a little disappointed. She thought that it was an awfully ordinary gift to come from a fairy. But the longer she looked at it, she realized that the sponge sort of had a sparkling sort of glimmer about it. You couldn't really see it if you looked straight at the sponge, but if you kind of looked at it out of just the corner of your eye, you could see it sort of sparkle and shimmer and scintillate. She thought, perhaps this sponge is not as ordinary as it looks. Well, she decided that she would try it out. The first thing she decided to try it out on was her chalkboard. So she went and she drew on the chalkboard. She drew a big picture of a smiley face and put her name next to it. And then she took the sponge and she wiped it off. And it worked just as she expected. It wiped it off. And then she decided that she was going to try wiping the table for dinner. And she wiped it off, and her mommy commented on how perfectly clean the table was. And Linda thought that perhaps that was the sponge's magic, that it cleaned things very easily. But then something happened. During dinner, her little brother, had a glass of grape juice, and he set it too near the edge of the table, and he knocked it with his elbow, and it knocked off. And Linda's family was a little silly because they had white carpet in their dining room. And Linda's mommy said, "Oh no, purple grape juice on our white carpet." And Linda said, "Let me try, Mommy." And she got her sponge out, and she put it on the grape juice stain, and she just rubbed over it once, and it disappeared. "Wow," said Linda, "this can really clean anything." Now soon, neighbors began to hear about Linda's very special sponge, and they began to call her, offering her little jobs whenever they had a mess that they could not get cleaned up in any other way. They called Linda and her sponge. Mrs. Dimwhistle called her when her 2-year-old colored orange crayon all over her wooden floor, and she paid her a whole $1 to bring her sponge over and wipe it up. Mr. Hissyfit called her when he was changing the oil in his car, and he slipped and the oil went all over his driveway and all over his clothes and all over his car. And Linda came over and she patted all those spots with the sponge, and they were as clean as new. Soon Linda's fame and the fame of her sponge spread through the city and the county and the state and the country. And one day, when she was 9 years old, Linda got a telephone call. It was a telephone call that she had never expected. The call, when it came, her mother answered it, and she said, "Hello?" "Oh, you're kidding." "You're not kidding?" "Oh, well, certainly, I'll put her on. Linda, the phone's for you." Linda picked it up and said, "Hello?" A woman's voice on the other end of the phone said, "Please hold one moment. Is this Linda?" Linda said, "Yes." She said, "I have the President of the United States on the phone for you." And Linda said, "Okay." She didn't know quite what to do. She knew the President was a very important woman, but she had never imagined that she would call her. So Linda waited a moment, and then a woman's voice came on the phone. It said, "Hello? Is this Linda?" And Linda said, "Yes. Yes, Madam President." And the President said, "Yes, Linda, I have a problem. Our country, the United States, was signing a treaty with another country, the country of Turkey. And we had all the treaty all printed out, and we were all ready to sign it. And I'm afraid that I was a little clumsy, and I knocked over my bottle of ink, and it has spread all across the treaty, and it's going to be ruined. And the delegation from Turkey, they can't stay any longer, and so we can't wait to get a whole new treaty printed up." She said, "I wanted to send my helicopter for you to come and bring this amazing sponge that I've heard up so much to see if you can fix our treaty. Will you do that for me?" And Linda said, "Well, sure." And the President said, "Well, thank you." And Linda got off the phone. She hung up and she told her mommy, and her mommy said, "Wow." And her mommy helped her put on her best dress, and her nicest shoes, and she got her sponge, and she got her camera.
Why?
Well, because if you were going to the White House and were going to meet the President of the United States, wouldn't you want your camera?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she had just finished getting all those things when they heard this noise. And Linda rushed to her room window and looked out in her front yard, and there was a huge helicopter, a green helicopter, out in her front yard with 2 helicopter blades. And Linda went out the front door, and there were 2 men in suits, and they said, "Are you Linda?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "The President is waiting for you." And so she went into the helicopter, and they put up the staircase, and the helicopter took off. And they flew through the air very fast, and then they came down to land, and Linda looked down through the window, and she could see that they were landing in front of the White House. She had seen pictures of it, and she knew that that was where the President lived. She came down the stairs, and the men showed her where to walk, and she walked in, and then she walked some more into the White House, and they showed her, and there was the President. And Linda went up, and she shook the President's hand, and the President said, "Thank you so much for coming, Linda." And Linda said, "Sure." And the President showed her the treaty, and Linda took out her sponge, and she carefully wiped away all the ink spill, and the treaty looked as good as new. And the President said, "Oh, thank you so much. You've done your country a great service, Linda." And she said, "Is there anything I can do for you in thanks?" And Linda said, "Well, Madam President, can I get my picture taken with you?" And one of the men who had helped Linda came, and she took the picture, and he took the picture of Linda standing next to the President, shaking her hand. And then Linda took her camera, and as she was leaving, she heard the President calling in the delegation from Turkey so that they could all sign the treaty between the 2 countries. And Linda went back downstairs, and she got in the helicopter, and she flew all the way home. And as soon as she got home, she printed out that picture, and she took it to show to everyone she knew. She took it and showed it to school, at school to all her friends and her teacher, and everyone was so impressed. And that's the end of the story.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. If you enjoy the show, please tell someone about it or leave a review on your podcast provider. Our website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.com, and you can also find us on most social media. I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.